makes you wanna go. Makes you wanna go. Na 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 na. Put your hands together now. Everybody now.
Welcome. I think you've got your mic is over there. Perfect. The button.
Hello.
Guys, we need a little bit more energy than this. Let's go. There you go. Okay, now we have energy. We're ready? We vibe from you guys. So you got to bring the energy for us to continue what we're doing. Cool? All right. So Sheen, I'm so happy you're able to make it because there are so many things that I wanted to talk to you about and bring up in this conversation, but I just narrowed it down to 3 separate topics. And they're relevant to what you've created. They're relevant to a lot of people who are here. As we noticed, some people have got an idea and they don't know how to launch it, when to launch it. They're nervous about certain things. So I hope by the end of this conversation, there will be some inspired people who are going to go out there and start creating. That's the intention that we're setting here.
Done.
Perfect. So first question. This is all about preparation because a lot of people have asked during these events, what do I do to make sure that I'm getting the most out of my podcast, creating the best kind of content? And I've noticed that with you, you are really good at preparing and selecting your guests and the topic as well. So my main question here is, how do you balance the selection that you've got between staying within your niche and going into what the audience wants? So is it more about what the audience are looking for and you adhere to their needs and requirements, or what you've got in mind in terms of what your niche podcast is requiring you to bring?
Thank you, Fari. That's a very good question. I think I'll start by saying that it really depends on what is your goal with a podcast, right? If your goal is you have a message and you know what you want to share, then you should not be influenced by what the audience wants, because whatever your niche is, you will find that audience that wants that. But if you just want virality, you're seeing this as a business, then it's a very different approach. Then you do need to cater to what the audience wants. So knowing why you're doing the podcast is very important to start with. And I would say that for me, the podcast has evolved over the years. So I started in 2021. It's been 3 years. We are currently in season 6. And the first season, I've heard a lot of you don't like to do camera. My first season was fully audio. And that was because I did not want to be on camera. And then season 2, I started recording online on Zoom. Then season 3 is when I actually went into a studio, and now all of this is history. So it's absolutely fine to evolve as you go, because for me, I realized that the audio was fine. But even for me to connect with my guests was very difficult because we were not even in the same place. We're not seeing each other. We can't really bounce off emotions and energy. And then being online is also very different to being in person. Like we are today here. If we were online, it would be very different vibe. So that's why I really preferred the in-person, just because for me, it's important. The topics I'm talking about, I'm asking people to share their personal stories and really like dig deep into their feelings. And for that, you do need that interaction to happen in person. So that's why it's evolved over time. Now, when it comes to the theme, for me, the idea of the podcast itself, I guess I'll start from there, came because while I was at uni, I had very cool friends. I had a friend who dropped out of medicine to become an astronaut, and she's currently flying out to space right now from Switzerland. And I had another friend who dropped out to become an athlete, and she won a gold medal for GB. So I thought they have very cool stories. And I come from an island. I come from Mauritius. I had never heard of these different types of careers. And I thought, okay, I can learn from them that there's not just the same careers for everybody. And I can now think bigger, dream differently. And that's where the title also came, which was Dream Girl. And I thought, okay, let me see how I can share these curated stories. And that's how the idea of the podcast started. So till now, the main theme across the 6 seasons has been, how are people dreaming differently? How are they achieving those dreams? And how can others be inspired through these shared stories? And for that, it hasn't changed throughout. I mean, now we've made a few exceptions and we've had a few men on the podcast. I know. But again, it was purely with the intention of sharing their stories, because just because they're a man doesn't mean their stories can't inspire someone else. But again, it was in the same light of they have a very powerful story of a dream that has been achieved and they can share that with our audience. And for me, I found my audience from sticking true to what I wanted to do. Now, when it comes to choosing guests, everyone always asks me this. And the first season was purely my friends. The second season, I thought, let me start reaching out to people that I kind of know someone who knows them and can introduce me. And then season 3 became, let's just call DM. Let's just see what happens. And you get some responses, you don't get some. But now we've reached a point where people are reaching out to us to come on the podcast. So it does change over time. And obviously now that I have a bit more of a following, I have the credibility. So it's easy for me to cold outreach to people. But I'll tell you something, everyone loves talking about themselves. So if you want to reach out to anyone, reach out. The worst case is they'll say no or they'll not reply to you. But if you don't ask, you don't get. I'll tell you something that happened to me literally 2 weeks ago. I don't know if you've heard of Wizard Liz. She's a huge influencer. She has over 18 million followers. And I went to visit my friend in downtown and realized that she lives in that same building. I recognized her the parking. I'm a stalker a little bit. And I just...
You have been warned.
And I just DM'd her on Instagram. She doesn't follow anyone on Instagram. I DM'd her and I said, hey, I'm a little bit of a stalker. I realized you live in the same building as my friend. And I just thought, do you want to come on the podcast? She replied within 2 minutes. And she said, oh my goodness, I was just thinking I should start doing podcasts. Are you free tomorrow? And we recorded the next day. That video is now viral on YouTube. It's about to reach 1 million. So if you don't ask, you don't get. She just chose me randomly to be the first podcast she went on because I asked at the right time. So my advice is whoever you want as a guest, just ask.
That's really good advice.
Yeah, but a lot of people asked her before me, right?
I think it was timing.
Yeah.
You just happened to do it at the same time, and I think your intention and her intention matched, and it just so happened to work out. But that's really interesting because a lot of people spend a lot of time finding the right guest and putting a lot of effort into making sure that they adhere to their needs and they want this and they want that. But at the end of the day, I think if you just speak honestly in terms of why you've chosen them, it might resonate. And a lot of the times it happens as well for events. If we are looking for people to come as a guest, my intention is to find people who have value and are interested to give value. So in that regard, I can cherry pick who I want, but at the same time, it doesn't matter how many people we have at the event, how many followers we have. It's about how I deliver the intention and whether you match with that. So I think the same applies to a podcast guest. You can. And I so love what you said. If you don't ask, you don't get. And that's the message in life, right? You have to be proactive. Don't wait for people to come to you or spend hours trying to think, are they going to say yes or are they going to say no? You'll never know unless you ask them. Perfect. I love that. Thank you.
Fari, are you taking questions now or not?
Not yet, but
Okay.
who has a question? Well, it depends who it is and what's the question. So what is it? Is it about this specific topic? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, to be completely honest, think of it from their point of view. What does this bring to them? Nothing, right? So then it needs to be a give and take, because for you it will be great exposure through their channel. What do they gain from coming on your channel? At least if they're getting great quality content that they can repost, then they would do it. But if it's just audio, you're not established, very hard to get someone big. And also you shouldn't start from the get-go with a big guest, because you don't know what kind of host you are. You don't know what kind of podcast you have. So don't start big. You want to practice first with people you know, or guests that are more reachable, and then aim higher later.
Does that answer your question? Great. So this is the whole point of all of these conversations, is just to that thought-provoking ding, where is this going to go? So thank you for sharing that, because if you do have more thoughts and comments, this is a very open sharing platform, right? I want to make sure that we keep the questions going so we're not like taking 1,000 questions while we're going along. But feel free, if you do have a question, put your hand up and we can do it as we go along, right? So thank you for answering that. The other part of this preparation is there's a sweet spot between really preparing to the point where you have everything honed in and then losing sight of that spontaneity. So, for example, a lot of times I have my questions, but I also like, for example, to allow spontaneity to flow. And if someone does want to share something, or if I'm having that conversation or the interview and something comes up which is not planned, how do you find that sweet spot between over planning or planning to a T and allowing spontaneity to flow? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, very good question.
Thank you.
I get asked this all the time in terms of how much to prepare before a podcast. And to be honest, I don't bring questions with me to a podcast. Never. Because for me, what you have there is a wall between you and me. And a lot of people, especially if it's the first time you're meeting your guest and you're recording, they're not very comfortable with you. They don't know you very well. And subconsciously, you've put up a barrier between you two. And every time you break away from eye contact to read, you lose that person. And especially if there's someone who's not very comfortable on camera, it's their first time, or they're already a little bit like questioning, what am I saying? Am I coming across nicely on camera? Then you lose them. That's why for me, it's so important to be fully there and fully eye contact and there with my guests whenever I'm recording. So I never bring anything with me. But there is preparation that goes on beforehand that makes it easier to be in that position. So most of the times, the guests that I have are people that I know personally or people that I really look up to. So I know exactly what I want to talk to them about. But if I don't, I will look them up and read a lot about them, consume a lot of content about them without taking notes, without anything, just watching their videos, watching what they've usually said, reading a little bit about what they have achieved. And that in my head now, again, stalker, I now know a lot about them. I know what amazes me about them. What do I have a question about? What is a little bit weird? And then that gives me enough confidence to start the conversation and to know that if the conversation dies down, I have something that I would like to ask. But always, so this is one thing I've noticed. I've been invited on a few podcasts, and this is the thing to avoid at all costs, which is ask a question, the person answers, ask next question on my list. This is not an interview. This is a conversation. People want to be the third person on the couch when you two are having a chat. So if they feel like you're just going through a list of questions, which usually happens when you've over-prepared and you have a list of questions in front of you, they will completely disconnect. Your audience doesn't connect with you. So that's why, because you need to connect with your guests, you need to connect with your audience. So always keep that in mind. That's why don't have a list of questions. Listen to what the person is saying and listen with kind of like this little bit like inquisitive, curious mind of, ooh, what are they saying? What do you actually want to know more about? And then press on that and just take the conversation wherever it goes. You can try and rein it back sometimes. You do get guests that will go on and on and on and on about things that you don't necessarily want to talk about. So there needs to also be a skill of bringing them back and just be like, okay, thank you for sharing that. But also on the previous note, I wanted to talk to you about this, and then just bring them back to the point that you wanted to make. So that's why I would say always prepare yourself, but don't prepare a list of questions. Now, I know a lot of you will be thinking about this. Some guests sometimes ask, can I have a list of questions beforehand to prepare? And that's okay to send them general topics. And I always have the same email that I will send if someone asks me this, which is, I'm glad you're preparing for the podcast, but I don't need you to prepare. This is about yourself. This is about you. There's nothing that you need to prepare. But if you do want to know the general themes of conversation, these are 5 main themes that we will explore, but we might not stick to it depending on where the conversation goes. So then you've managed expectations, but you've also made them feel a little bit better about preparing.
This is the most important thing, because a lot of times people, like when I'm actually preparing for the podcast, selecting the guest is number one. First of all, I'm interested, very similar to what you said. I'm interested in what their story is, what they have to say. So I'm already involved. I'm having a conversation. I've had this debate with other podcasters where they're like, it's not a conversation at an interview. I'm like, not really, because the conversation flows, and that flow of conversation can lead anywhere. So if you allow that to be, it becomes very organic and authentic rather than, like you said, checklist. But I do believe, and maybe this is the project management side of me and the event manager, but you need to have, like you said, themes. For me, it's talking points. So if at least I'm sharing with them, these are the talking points, like I did with you and every guest that we have. The talking points are these areas that I want to cover. Now, that gives an indication in terms of if you start going off on a tangent, I am going to bring you back because this is what we're talking about. And I've noticed, I don't know about other people's experiences, but there have been times where I've had guests on the podcast and they have a script that they need to deliver. Whatever my question is, they don't give two diddly squats. They're like, I'm going to talk about this. So I'll talk about jeans and they'll talk about houses. And I'm like, well, what? I realize that their script is continuous and it's consistent. However, that's not what I want. I want raw information, their message at the core. So there is an element where I think hosting takes an art form. And to be able to manage that conversation, have you had any instances where you've had a really tricky, difficult guest and you've had to literally just either say, we cannot do this anymore? Has it been anything where it's really shocked you that they have a script and you had to somehow manage that?
Script, not necessarily. I've only had in my whole time of 6 seasons, one guest that I did not vibe with. And but I stopped the conversation because I struggled. I was like, you know, when you ask a question and they say one sentence and it's just done. Oh well, okay. All right then. So it's difficult then. And for me, if the energy is not there, what's the point of that conversation? So I stopped. I said, okay, let's stop rolling. What's happening? What is the issue? Because I've met this lady before. And she was like, oh, you know, my PA did not tell me that this will be recorded on camera. So I'm very conscious right now that the cameras are on. I was like, okay, so what would be different if the cameras were not on? If we just switch them off, would that be better? And she said, yeah, I think it would be better. And I was like, but the cameras will still be there. You'll still see them, right? She was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, then let's just say the cameras are off. And I said, let's just talk. Forget the podcast. And I was like, I started asking her about her kids, her grandkids, and we just started chatting, but we were still rolling. And then eventually I just slid into the conversation and it was absolutely fine. So I think it's very important to recognize little social cues as well, because not everyone will be immediately comfortable. Some people are not, it's different personalities, different energies. They might be having a bad day, right? So it's really good. You need to be good at recognizing what is going on. Why is that guest not okay? And if it might just be a difficult person, as you said, like someone who might have over-prepared. But for that, you need to also have a call beforehand to assess what this person is like in a conversation. Because if it's someone you don't know, and it's the first time you'll meet them, should not be on the podcast. You need to have practice talking to them before in a different setup, just to see if they can have a conversation with you that flows, because that's already a very good way of assessing. So because right now we have guests that reach out to come on the podcast. And every time, if it gets to the point where we are seriously considering them, I will have a call one-on-one to see what kind of conversation we can have. It doesn't need to be relevant to the podcast, but just if we can vibe, because if we can't, I will not take it. So I think for me, my main thing is if you are struggling in an episode with a guest, just take a break and just tell them, address it. Just be like, why are we struggling? Is there something you would rather talk about? Do you not want to talk about this? Are you not feeling okay? Is there something I can do to make this a better process for you?
That's really interesting. And I think there's two different types of guests I've noticed. One who loves being in front of the camera, supernatural, and you can just leave them and they can talk for hours. The other ones, they are a little bit nervous or camera shy or conscious or whatever it is. They need a little bit more TLC. They've got a great message. And I seem to have this radar for noticing people who have a great message. They're great when you're talking to them one-on-one off camera. Minute they see a camera, it's like a deer in the headlights. I don't know what's going on. And I realized that it's our role, our job to extract that message, make them feel comfortable. Like I said here, this is a safe space for everybody. If you can create that safe space in the podcast studio, whatever it might be, they will feel a little bit more at ease. And you did exactly what I think everyone who has that guest who is a little bit nervous, that just let them know this is going to be edited. We're not live. We're not live streaming here. We can edit this. You make a fumble, it's fine. Because I think a lot of people suddenly think to themselves, oh my goodness, I have to get everything correct. And I remember I had one guest on the first podcast, his first ever podcast, and he was so good when we were just going through the talking points. And in the middle of the conversation, I asked him the question and he was just like, I thought, should we just stop? Because I know the answer to this. We've covered it. And I knew he was just nervous. And we stopped. We just, similar to you, took a little bit of a break. And then I said, okay, remember, this is the topic we're talking about. This is what I want you to say. He goes, their stats. I was like, tell me your story. It's just tell me your story. And then it just allowed him to feel at ease and it just flowed. So I think it's very interesting that we need to be able to manage the conversation, the studio, the team, and it can get a little bit tedious, I think, if you're trying to ask someone to get their message out and they're nervous. So it's very interesting that you've gone through that as well. Thank you for sharing that. The next topic that I want to talk about, consistency. Now, you've said you've had this podcast for a few years. It's been 3 years now. How many people have actually launched 10 episodes? How many have crossed 20? How many have crossed 50? Ooh, okay, you're in. How many have crossed 100? Okay, you guys, what number am I going to hit? 500? 200? Where are we at? 180? Do we have higher than 180? Look, Sheen? Well done. Can we have a big round of applause for these three guys? Sheen, Maha, and Vuk. That takes a lot of commitment, dedication, and a level of consistency. So perfect talking point for me. I want to know, as you were going through these years, you mentioned yourself that the numbers weren't obviously high. You started with an audio. Then as the seasons went along, you started to find different guests. They weren't all your friends. So at what point did you have that aha moment that said to you, I'm on the right path. I'm not going to deviate from this. Even though you called it Dream Girl and you've invited men. Like, what made you 100% conviction to say, this is my podcast format and I'm not deviating from that?
Good question again. That's making me think myself now. We're getting an identity crisis for the
Cha-ching!
podcast.
This is exactly what I want.
No, I think, honestly, for me, I won't lie, it wasn't that hard at the start because I hit 1,000 subscribers the first day I launched the podcast.
The first day?
The first day.
And who was your guest on the first episode?
It was me being interviewed by my friend who was super famous. So,
well, I think you hit the goal.
Yeah.
You know, that's fine.
So,
okay.
so we didn't
Well done.
have a slow start. But then obviously it didn't happen overnight. 2 days ago is when I hit 100K on YouTube, actually.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. So it's been a few years of growth. Instagram grew first. But I think for me, till date, I only do the podcast because I personally enjoy it. So even at that time, so I was working full time as a consultant. I was working 18 hours a day and I would still find the time to plan the podcast and record it and edit it myself. So because I enjoy the conversation till now, when I'm in there, and I think all the Podster people can attest to that, I'm having the time of my life. I love it. I enjoy the conversation. I feel like I'm learning. I'm there to learn. It's an added bonus that people will watch it and it might perform online. So for me, that's my passion. That's why I do it. And that was from day one till today. It was the same thing and it hasn't changed. It's been consistent, which is why my main thing is always to tell people, know why you're doing the podcast. What is it you're trying to achieve? Because that's what will keep you going, especially in the days when you're not seeing the numbers. If you want to see the numbers, you need to wait and be consistent. And one good advice I got, which helped me, was that you need to have at least 50 pieces of content online before you start even analyzing the performance of your content. Because the 50 pieces are for you to make mistakes, for you to try different things, and for you to just learn by doing. And you might even discover what you want from this. So for me, I started audio and I really hated camera, but then I went on camera and I realized I loved it. So then I switched to that. So the first 50 is for you to learn. And the advice was that keep pushing, because once something goes viral, eyes will fall onto your page and they will see that this is not something that happened like this. It was just, this is what you do daily. And that's true. The first time I went viral, when people came, I got 100,000 followers overnight because they just saw that I had 5 seasons of episodes before that. So and what kept me going was that I enjoyed it. And if you don't enjoy it, and it's all about, what do they say? Journey before destination, right? So if you're just focused on the destination of having a big podcast, monetizing it, getting the big numbers, It won't happen that easily. So you need to like the process, find a way of enjoying it. Remind yourself, why did you start this podcast? And that's what keeps you going in the dark days of the little views.
And there are dark days. I mean, there came to a point where I think I just thought to myself, I've just hit 100 subscribers on YouTube. This is ridiculous. I've already done 10 episodes. What is this? And then I started to talk to more people, and the metrics I had in my mind were delusional. I was thinking, okay, you're going to do a couple, and then it's going to start getting views, and it's going to grow. And I realized, holy moly, no.
Wait,
give
can I
it
just
time.
add something? You said you posted 10 episodes, right? And then you were expecting it to give
At
you
least
more.
grow into a few hundred.
So we all know Walt Disney, right? You know how many times Mickey Mouse, the concept, got rejected? 300 times. He went through years and years of rejection, at least 300 rejections before somebody said, okay, that makes sense. Let's put money in it. And Mickey Mouse has become the household cartoon for the world for years to go on. So if he had the patience, because he believed in it, he had the patience to wait through 300 rejections. We don't have the patience of going past 10 episodes.
That's true, because I think we've now, social media and media in general has made us this short-term gratification, that our minds work on quick results. If you put something out there and you are watching the numbers and they're not going up, you feel like you failed. So I think it's the same as a lot of people when they're trying to lose weight. They tell you, don't look at the scales, because you're going to be literally fixated on that number, and you're going to forget about the journey. It's about a progress, a lifestyle change. The same with creating content. If you're focused so much on the numbers, which I was for a point, because I was like, I have to see the numbers grow, otherwise I'm not going to continue. And I realized, whoa, that's the wrong success metric. If people are actually sending me messages and telling me, this made me realize that I'm not such a failure. I only had a failed business. I can do it again. So many other people did. Thank you for sharing. That to me was like, that person had a moment of connection and resonance. So this is what I want to do it for, not for the numbers as much. So I think your reasoning that you do it because you love it, understand your why. And I think Simon Sinek will be super happy we're having this conversation, because if you know what your why is, then you do that with a level of conviction that has the chance to continue and have that consistency for success. Like you three guys who have hit over 100 and something. We have a question from Lara. Yes, my dear. It's a nice segue to our next topic, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, fair question, to be honest. And Vogue, don't cancel me. But I'm going to say that you don't need a studio to record a podcast, right? And I'll give you actual examples. So the person I said that I reached out to recently and came on the podcast, she has 18 million followers. She doesn't own a camera. She films on her phone in her kitchen with no mic. And the sound is horrible. It's echoey. You can barely hear what she's saying, but she gets millions of views because of the value and the content, right? So obviously production is a nice added bonus that will make something more pleasant and can get you views a lot quicker. But it doesn't mean that if without it, you're not going to make it. And I know there's this example as well. I don't quote me on this, but Jay Shetty gets around 350,000 downloads a month per episode. But there's this girl in Saudi that gets 500,000 downloads a month, and she records on her laptop with the mic on her laptop, and that's a podcast. Thank you. I mean, so the first 2 seasons I did invest in it. And also I would say you need to edit yourself in the first few episodes because you need to know what's your style, what's your voice. And when you hire an editor, oh my goodness, nightmare. So you need to know what to tell them and how to train them. So unless you've done it yourself, it gets very hard. But for me, I remember when the first time I went to Podster and I thought I'm going to invest in this. Oh no, he didn't like it.
Did we upset you? Why are you leaving us? I have.
That's fair. That's fair.
All right, fine. You may leave. Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank you for coming.
thank you. Yeah. So then I decided. I remember telling everyone around me, I'm investing money in this. I'm going to do 1 season and see what happens. And I invested money in it. Did it the best version I could. And for me, it worked in that season, right? It went viral in that season. So I think it's unfair for me to tell people to keep going after that if you don't see the numbers. But it is, again, it comes back to what is your vision and your mission with this podcast? Because if you enjoy it, this is something you want to do long term. There are more expensive hobbies. I am sure golf costs more than a podcast. So it is, yeah. So you see, so there are very different hobbies. So it's up to you at the end of the day. You got to make the decision as to whether you are putting a deadline to when you want to see the return or it's just something you want to do long term.
I think also there's another point that if we just talk about in terms of don't use the cost as an excuse as to not start, because there are many people who are creating content without full production studio and everything. And then there are people who want to do it in a certain way. And then you have resources like Podster Studios who were able to help you with the studio and the post-production and everything. But at the same time, that could be an excuse for a lot of people as to, well, I don't have the money for it. So in that regard, figure out what it is. Is it an excuse that you don't want to do it? Or is it something that you actually can find the funds to plug into it? And if you can, then what's your excuse? So a lot of people do use the funds and the expense aspect of it as an excuse. So I just want to put that in there as well. Figure out if it's an excuse or a viable reason. Vuk, you had a question? Comment. Thank you for that, Vuk. Because I think your point, you are the person who's seeing this. Your analysis of this is really important for us to take on board. They have the intention to create. Or maybe it's not a passion for everyone. Maybe it's a journey that you want to try and understand. This is for me. Am I good on audio? Am I better on video? Whatever it might be. We have a lot of people here who prefer audio. Throughout the events, they're understanding, well, actually, let me try video. Right? So that journey and understanding what is right for you is, I think, the core element of it, rather than putting as a metric 10, where have I got to, and then figure it out from there. Don't be disheartened, I think is your message. There was somebody here? Yes.
Mine really varied. The first season I think was 20. Then because Podster then had the bundle of 10, I started doing 10. But then every time there would be one or two guests that wanted to be an add-on. So I've never stuck to a number. But for me, it's just because I want to do about 2 months worth of content. And then I want to sit back and think on how to improve the next season.
Nice. Okay. So we're going to move on to the third top. Yeah.
So for me, not necessarily, because I used to film for YouTube anyway. So I used to film at home. I have all the equipment, and I used to do proper YouTube content, which was not podcasts. So I was very used to being in front of the camera with lights and mics and everything. So that didn't change as much, but it made it a lot easier because, Podster is so smooth. I did the plug. And that's why...
This is not a sponsored episode. Let's just put it out there.
No, I was trying to make up for saying don't go to a studio. But yeah, so that's why. But obviously I can tell that it's also a much better experience for the guests as well. When they come to a studio, they get comfortable, then we film. So it's much nicer than, let's jump online.
Yeah. So and actually one experience that I did have during COVID, I did a couple of webinars and I was craving that interaction. I couldn't do events, so I was doing these you were so right. The vibe you get from an online conversation, nowhere close. These kind of setups that we have where we're actually having the interactions with people, it's not the same online. So I know there are a lot of people who are diehard audio fans, and I love listening to audio podcasts, but there is something else when I like to look at the person's expression, that emotional realization of them sharing or whatever it is, I seem to enjoy it more. There are a lot of people who like to listen and not watch, but I think it depends on your format as well. Where do you shine your best? Some people are great on audio and that's it. I think, is that a question or a comment, Wahid? Okay, go ahead. Wahid, you came too early on this conversation. The next topic is monetization. Where are you going, my friend? Easy. Okay, so you've got into the monetization. Let's open the barriers to monetization. Let's go.
So are you saying where you would host the podcast on your own site?
Would you do it? Your own website.
Put it behind like a paid wall, basically.
Yeah.
I would never do that because I want to provide value. So for me, the podcast is my way of providing free value or paid by other people, but not by the audience. And I think that's the best way for me to do that because remember, my aim was to help. So I still want to help the masses for free. But then there are some paid things that happen that can redirect the audience that has the means and want to spend a bit more to get a bit more help. Then there are ways to make them convert into paid thing. And I do have a website where we sell things, but I will never put the podcast behind a paid wall, if that answers your question.
So I think from my understanding of your question is more about bypassing the algorithms that are out there on social media in terms of putting it out. A lot of people are putting it on the different platforms, right? But if you have your own website or a landing page, let's say, and your content is there, then you share the link to your own website rather than...
Where are you sharing that link?
Well, this is the thing. If you do have social media, this is one point I wanted to actually raise with you. You said that you jumped from Instagram and your numbers suddenly exploded. How did you, because we've noticed in a lot of this conversation, the content on social media doesn't always transfer into the viewers on YouTube or Spotify. So how did you do that short form lead into watching or listening to long form content? Because that's, I think, maybe one of the reasons why potentially avoiding the algorithm and being shadow banned on your topics or whatever it is, you can avoid it by having your own website. So how did you do the short form into the long form direction?
I will answer your question first. I think, yes, you can avoid the algorithm, but it's a lot more work trying to get people to discover your website. And that's for me, at this point where I've understood the algorithm. I know how to make it work for me. It would be silly for me to leave it now and try something else that's equally hard. But I can see how that can work for others. I haven't tried it, so I will not talk about that. Sorry. I hope that helps.
Okay.
Yeah. But you still need.
Yeah.
But going back to the question, I'm actually going to offer an alternative to what you said. I think I prefer YouTube audience than Instagram audience. They're so much more loyal. They watch an hour-long video and they comment, and they are your super fans. They're the ones who will make sure the first time you upload, they are there to comment to make sure the algorithm knows. So I much prefer YouTube. And of course, on YouTube, you get paid per views. So, that's much better than Instagram. But going back to your question about the clips redirecting people to long form. So I initially thought that the clips would do that. But for me, the clips did not do that. And I'm not going to speak about that's how it works. But for me, what the clips did is they made the podcast and my face recognizable. So now when people went on YouTube, they were like, oh, I know this girl. Let me see what she's saying. And a lot of people would comment telling me that that's how they watched the video, and they ended up liking it. But also YouTube has a very different audience and Instagram has a different audience. So I don't think I have the same people who follow me across platforms. Spotify is a different audience as well. Because when I look at the analytics, you can see that the countries are different, the age split is different. So completely different people are finding you on different platforms. And that's the point of different platforms. Now you're attracting different types of people. The type of content you put on different platforms are different. So it brings in a lot more varied people. Especially that becomes important when it's time to convert them to paid stuff. Because you're now known to a lot more people than you would if you were on just one platform. But I don't know how useful clips are to convert to YouTube. YouTube is a completely different game. The long form there performs really well. The clips don't perform as well. So that's my experience of it.
Nice. And thank you for the segue into the last topic that I want to talk about. And that's the different sources of monetizing your channel, your content. We've discussed in previous events here about sponsorship, and this is really interesting to me what you've tapped into. And I want you to please share with the audience in terms of your experience of product placement, getting the right people to support your content for you to be able to continue the creation of the content without having to worry about the cost. So can you talk us through the different revenue streams and the different resources of monetizing your channel, which is aside from sponsorship?
Yeah, so the obvious one is YouTube AdSense. So once you cross, I think, 1,000 subscribers on YouTube and 4,000 watch hours, you're automatically eligible for the paid program, and then you get paid per views. And that payment is very dependent on how many followers you have, which countries they're based in, what kind of topics you're making, so therefore what type of ads the algorithm is putting on your video. but you do get paid per view. So it's pretty decent once you reach a certain number. Of course, sponsorship, and sponsorship can take different forms. It can either be that someone wants to sponsor the full season, they want to sponsor one episode, or they want for you to create a specific mini series for them. And the sponsorship, the deliverables will depend. So as you said, product placement, some of them would want you to display their brand. They might want a sticker on the mic. Some people are very, very specific about what they want. And it really depends. But again, that's up to you how much you want, how much freedom you want to give to the sponsor. And then what else?
Like if you want to have water placed, specific products where you actually are going to be doing that per episode. You can have multiple product placements in one episode.
Yeah, you can. I don't necessarily do product placement that's different because currently the episodes themselves have a sponsor. So then based on the contract, I'm not allowed to bring in a different ad in there. But people also offer things for free. So for example, I started this tradition of giving a bouquet at the end of my episode to the guest, and the card on the bouquet is signed by the previous guest, and they sign the card for the next guest. And that's one way of connecting all of my guests. The men get it as well, Vuk. Don't worry.
I think Vuk is trying to pitch for having an episode with you somehow.
I want to come on your podcast. What happened to that? And
Okay, play nice, guys.
and yeah, so then we have florists who will give us the flowers for free, and they don't expect to get a shout out in the episode, but I will then afterwards post a story or something just to say thank you. So there's a lot of like barter collab as well. And then of course I get paid to come and speak about podcasting, about my experience. I do workshops on podcasts. That's another way. So then it becomes very kind of like indirect ways of monetizing being a podcaster. And then of course you can convert into products. So you can actually do a course, which everyone does. And you can also do templates. You can do coaching one-on-one for other podcasters. I've recently done a workshop on how for people to know how to be a host, because that's a conversation, and communication can be something that doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. So that's one thing I did. And I think that's pretty much it.
So can we touch upon the online program that you're going to be launching? Because this is something that I had no idea about until I struck up conversation. Like I said, my guest selection is based a little bit intuitively. And when I was having the conversation, I was like, well, I really want to discuss a little bit your preparation and then how else you're able to monetize. And then this whole gem of an idea came up that you're launching it in the next couple of weeks. And I wanted you just to please touch upon that a little bit so that people can know what topics you're going to be covering and if it might be useful for them.
Sorry for breaking that up. So we are launching a podcast academy, and it will have different aspects. So one of it is one-on-one coaching with me as a host, if you're a host. The other one will just have templates that will help you think through different aspects of the podcast, and there will be an actual course. And everything will cover whether you have an idea and you're thinking whether it makes sense to do a podcast around it. There is the ideation, the branding, there's the actual planning, finding a guest, how to reach out to a guest, and then how to be a host, the production side of things, and then the post-production side of things, cross-posting across platforms, how to grow the podcast, how to get past the first 10 episodes, and eventually how to monetize as well. So everything will be launched very soon. We're in the process of launching it. Lots of hiccups right now, but it is coming. And yeah, I think we'll have a wait list that we will, and I'm very happy to offer 10% to everybody who's here today.
So that's another way to be able to monetize. Once you hit those levels, you're able to then just create different revenue streams of that. So those are my different questions that I had for you. I'm going to open up to the audience. Anyone else who's got some aha moments from this conversation, if you have a question that you want to talk about, or if you have an inquiry, this is now your chance. So I'm going to give you the mic. Come on, here you go.
All right, so I was looking at TikTok a while back, and I came across a video of the wizard Liz. And for people who don't know who she is, she talks about basically self-help, etc. A lot of people are probably going to hate me for saying this, but she's basically female Andrew Tate, if that makes sense. She's talking to females, like, you know, the female equivalent. And I saw a video of her on TikTok on a podcast, and I was like, this looks oddly similar to Podster. And the first thought that came to my mind was, how the hell did someone manage to get a hold of her? And then I looked at you and I recognized you. I was like, damn, So you mentioned how you got her on the podcast, but could you specifically elaborate a little bit more on how you structure a message? Is it specific for every person, and how you address the differences in the things that you can possibly talk about with each guest, or is it like just one format, or you just don't have a format? That's one question. The other question is, if you have a guest who's super talkative, which is a good thing, but if they're too talkative, how do you balance the conversation and ensure that you also get a say?
Okay. First question. My message to Liz was literally, "Hey, realize you live in the building of my friend. Would love to have you on the pod. XX." That's all I sent.
Wow.
So it really, you know what people hate, which I hate as well now when I get, it's a long email with a lot of details, and I'm not going to read it. So you need to keep it short and very succinct. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. Don't send irrelevant details about you, what you've done, what you've achieved. These are all my links, my LinkedIn, my parents. We don't need all of that. Just keep it very simple. This is who I am. This is my podcast. I would like to have you on for these reasons. This is what I used to do in the early days. Obviously now it's a little bit different. But in the early days, that's what I would do. Just be very clear. And also it shouldn't look like a copy-pasted message. It needs to have a specific reason why you think this specific person, what are they going to bring to your podcast? So that's one. Your second question was?
If you have a super talkative guest and they're like not letting you talk at all, how do you balance the conversation?
Why do you have to talk?
Let's just say you have, let's just say you feel like you can improve the quality of the conversation by adding something that you think the audience might ask.
Okay, then, so I'll tell you why I asked you that question was because I've been on a podcast before where the host was just trying to speak more than I was speaking. And I was like, why did you invite me? Just have a solo episode at this point. So as a host, you need to have a very good balance as to how much you are trying to impose yourself on the guests, right? So you are there to curate the conversation and let them flourish in that conversation. So that's one way. Now, the second thing is if someone is talking a lot, you need to know when to stop them. And I would just, I don't have an issue with stopping. I would just be like, okay, thank you. They will breathe at some point, right? They need to stop to breathe. So just jump in then and just be like, by the way, I just wanted to bring you back to that topic. But you need to be assertive because this is your platform and you need to have the presence. And if your presence is assertive enough, the guest will stop. If they, from your body language, they should be able to tell, oh, okay, he wants to say something now.
No, you're absolutely right. But I've had some guests who, honestly, I've been like at the brink of being kind of rude, but polite. But sometimes they still don't get the hint. But yeah, thank you very much. That answers my question.
I think you just raised a very important point about the assertiveness of the show, which actually we all need to learn how to establish, because I've seen the interviews that you were doing and I didn't see you talking much, which is interesting, right? Because I think we all start podcasts for a reason, because we want to say something, and then we start doing interviews because probably we kind of, through the guest conversation, we think that our identity, I don't know, will come out in a certain way. Anyway, the point being is that if you share, let's say, if you share some practices or probably your reflections in terms of how to establish the assertiveness, how to not to allow the, let's say, the celebrity guests to overcome, let's say, your platform and the importance of you in this show. This is number one. And number two, do you think everybody is created and fitted to the format of the podcasting? Do you think it's for everybody? Or it's a question about, like, we have to be realistic, right? Podcasting is different. We can have a monologue, we can have, I don't know, a panel of discussion. We might be actually prepared to stand on a stage and, you know, lead an event, etc., etc. But we think podcasting, is this because it's the easier way to get a publicity? Or do you think this format is can fit everyone basically who has something to say?
No. 100% no. I think just like any job, any hobby, not everyone is meant for it. We have different personalities. We're comfortable with different things. We have different strengths and weaknesses. And being on camera and also like conversing is an art. And I think a lot of people don't realize this. They think that it's just, I talk every day. I can talk on camera. But it's a very different art of conversing. And I like how you pointed that I don't speak a lot on podcasts. I don't, because I have different avenues where I'm talking, where people learn about me. I do solo podcasts, and that's where you'll hear me talk about things. Because for me, the podcast is not my time to shine. For me, the podcast is for me to bring someone else's story out and let people learn from that. And the other thing that you mentioned was celebrities, right?
How do you establish the assertiveness of yourself in this platform, considering that you might have really big guests in your show that you're interviewing?
Mm-hmm.
How do you not allow them to overshine the actual show?
Okay, so I'm going to try not to sound like a douchebag, but for me, I don't see celebrities as being special. And that's also because I went to Cambridge and my professor was Stephen Hawking. And I was there when he died. I used to dine with him. So for me, I've seen people who the world see as super special, as normal people. And that's an unfair advantage that I have. So I don't see someone because they're famous on Instagram with a lot of followers as being someone special. I admire their work and I might admire what they have to say, which is why I bring them on. But I don't see them as being someone special. And once you tune into the fangirl moment, that's when you can't be assertive with someone else. You need to be in a position. Hello, latecomers. And so I would say if you tune into the fangirl moment, then that's when it becomes difficult for you to assert yourself in front of the other person. But if you treat them like any other guests, as anyone else who you're trying to learn from or you're trying to ask them questions, that's when it changes from that mentality of, ooh, I get to talk to this celebrity, because you can't. If you're a fangirl in that moment, that's when you can't assert yourself. And that's when the other person automatically, they might not be doing it for any bad reason, but they will take the space that is there. So you need to manage how much space you give them.
And just a practical question, is it more difficult to deal with celebrity guests than with, I don't know, any other category? I don't want to point.
Not in my opinion. I think celebrities have been really nice to me. Everyone has been super friendly. And I think we might be too quick to judge and think that they will be difficult. I've had people who are difficult who are not celebrities. And then, I think, again, it's a personality thing, right? It's entirely to do with the person and how humble they are and how real they are as a person. But I wouldn't say celebrities are difficult to manage. I've had the best times with celebrities.
Hi, my name is Vishal. I co-host a podcast. It's called Karak Chat. And it's nice to meet you. I don't want to ask these questions. I would rather invite you as a guest and ask, but I cannot help it. So, do you fumble?
Well, as in...
As a host, because we spoke about guests, right? But do you fumble?
Like the way I'm talking,
in your podcast.
If I get a word wrong or something,
Yes,
all the
yes.
time.
All right, okay.
English is not my first language. My first
Same
language
here.
is French.
Same here, it's Hindi. So what's your escape strategy? Like, when you fumble, like how do you...
From what? It's human to fumble.
Right.
That's the thing. I don't understand why people try to cut the, I'm like, this is a normal conversation. Think about the audience. They don't want to hear curated. They're not watching a TV show. They're listening to a human interaction, and that just makes it human. I never cut out the ahs, and I never cut out the fumbles. I just leave it. I'm just like, oh, sorry, brain fart. Next thing. Like, it's fine. No need to fix that.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. So we spoke about guest, celebrity, non-celebrity, but actually talking about your guest, how is the selection happening? Who do you decide to choose? Because I saw obviously your show and your podcast on YouTube. I saw Karak with Marin, she's there. I saw you had Sarah Al-Medani. So there is a different variety of women in different fields. Do you choose someone who is currently trending at the moment, someone who has done an important show, or do you like, how is the selection of who do I want to bring in my show, which is yours?
I think you've answered the question yourself. I go for variety. I just want variety. I remember the first time I did the season, I was thinking, how much diversity do I have in terms of ethnicity, in terms of ages, and in terms of what do they do career-wise. So that's how I've always approached it, because the whole point is to be inclusive and to appeal to anyone out there, any young girl, any young woman who's trying to learn from this podcast should see themselves in it. And that's why I've always gone for variety. And Sarah was a friend of mine. She's actually asked me the season before to come on. And I was like, no, you're on Real Housewives. This is not the vibe I want. And then the next season, I was like, you know what? I'm being silly. It will help with viewership. And I was like, okay, Sarah, come on. And then she did. It was. She's amazing, right? She's a very good speaker. And again, why was it amazing? And till date, this is the best podcast she's been on. It's performed the best because we are friends. So the conversation, the vibe is different. We had no preparation. We were both late to the recording. And then we had to rush through it because we didn't have enough time. But it's just the vibe, right? And that's what I'm trying to tell you, which is why I'm never calculating in the sense of who's trending right now, who can I invite that I will get the views from them. Never that. It's always, for example, Liz, I loved her content. I watched her since I was at university. And I was like, okay, I love what she says and how she says it. And that's why I invited her. And anyone else, like even my friends, my parents have been on a podcast episode because I wanted that side of me to be portrayed to my audience. A lot of like my other episode that has gone super viral is also my best friend from university. She's not anyone no one knows. She doesn't even have Instagram, but it's because the quality of the conversation is different. So I've always thought about what do I bring in terms of diversity to my audience. That's it.
Hi. So I have a few questions for you. Should I just ask them one by one? Yeah, okay. Okay, one by one. So you have a really strong personal brand and your podcast has a really strong brand. Is that something you built along the way? Or is it something you've had since the beginning and then you never changed?
So again, I never had the intention of building a personal brand. So for me, it just happened organically that whatever I was doing was kind of like adding up somehow together. And I thought, okay, this is proving to be quite nice. So let's see. And at that time, I was so concerned that I would be boxed into being a podcaster. So you'll see till date, I don't have a page for the podcast. It's still, everything is under my own page. And that's because earlier on, I was like, oh, I don't want people to know me as that podcast girl, which is because I used to think I was a content creator. But now I've accepted my faith. It's okay. But at the time I was just like, oh, I'm a lot more than this. I don't want people to think it's just a podcast. And that's why I was struggling with like that identity of what is happening. But I've always then, once that bell kind of rung that, okay, I do have a story to tell, is when I thought, okay, no, I want to focus on my personal brand. And at the time, I wanted to also, be a corporate girly. I wanted to get a job and be employed and all of that. So then I was working on building myself into being such a strong personal brand that anyone would want to hire me. But then that kind of went out the window. Now I'm known for quitting my job 4 times. But that's also what led to me becoming, okay, now this is my personal brand and this is what I do. And now that I'm, a self-employed entrepreneur, that carries on nicely across the different aspects of my life other than just content creation. But yeah, I guess I hope that answers.
And this is something you learned yourself, or did you take some kind of mentorship for, or did you learn it?
Learned what?
How to build this brand of yours.
What do you call building a brand?
Establishing credibility through your digital.
So it's just producing content.
I mean, in a very specific way, in a very strong, credible way.
what's a strong, credible way of
goodness.
producing content? I'm trying to make you understand that I just was consistently pushing out content,
Okay.
and people started knowing me. And obviously, again, unfair advantage that, I went to Oxford, I went to Cambridge, I have a PhD. So this is my unfair advantage that I tapped into,
Okay.
so that was already there in terms of the credibility. And that's why initially people came to me.
So your content always followed like a brand guideline, just organically. It's not something
No.
you never developed it, or you did.
No, I don't have a
Okay.
brand guideline. And in the early days when I was doing YouTube, I used to do lifestyle. I used to do hair care. I used to do travel vlogs. I used to do day in the life, all of that. I did everything and anything under the sun. But now it's just become the podcast.
Okay. And another question I had was, is your podcast a business now, and is it something you plan for?
It is a business now, yes.
Okay.
But it was not the plan.
Okay.
It just happened to be that way.
But you've created a plan for it now, like future forecasting and things like that?
No.
No. Okay.
No. I mean, the way I think of the podcast is every season I want something to be different.
Okay.
So I will approach it in the sense of like, for the next season, what do I want to do that will make it grow in an area that we haven't grown already? That's it. But I don't forecast numbers and things like that.
Okay. And last question is, you spoke about how when your guests are nervous, what like techniques you use to make them more comfortable. But what if they're actually like dry and boring? What do you do? Is it some like editing things that you do post interview, or do you just not put the interview up, or like how do you manage just really people who don't have a presence?
I guess that comes with who you choose to bring on. I have to say I've never had this issue. I've never thought someone was boring on the podcast, and we never edit anything out ever. We've ever only one time one guest told me, "Oh, I shouldn't have shared this. Can I watch it before we publish it?" And then when she watches, we're like, "Oh, actually, it wasn't that bad. Publish it." I've never had to remove anything from the podcast. The only thing we cut is the start, before I do the intro, we remove that, and the end after we've ended, before they switch off the camera. That's it. I never edit anything in between, because for me the conversation is raw and natural, and that's what my audience likes, and they know that to expect this. So I've never experienced a boring guest, I have to say.
So you've never not put up an episode because you didn't think it didn't provide enough value or anything like that? Okay. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Okay, I'm an actor from Toronto, so I hear a lot of when my guests are boring kind of thing. In my head, I take that to you didn't do your research picking the guest, and if the guest is boring, you didn't do your job as the host. My 2 cents would be, if the guest is boring, you're letting them have too much talking time, so you need to cut them off faster, as was mentioned before, and just like chop things up more. If a question's asked and they kind of give you a one-word response, ask a question super fast again. Throw them off the spot. Like, you have to be the yin to the yang. There should never be if my guest is boring, because that means you put too much weight on them to allow them to make your podcast good. It is your podcast. And to the celebrity aspect, if a celebrity's on your podcast, well, maybe that's too much weight off of you. Okay, that's like an ego thing. Yes, this is your name and your podcast, but you're here to learn. So people should be hearing from that celebrity, yes, but the yin and yang thing, there should never be a boring podcast, because then it does come back on you as the host. That's like Oprah saying, I did have a boring guest. Oprah cuts people off constantly, always chop this, chop that, commercial break. Think, what is my commercial break if my host is boring? Come up with something where you can, okay, randomly, we're going to play a game right now. Or, okay, cut the recording. We're going to use that in your final thing. Bring up something. You guys want to play Scrabble? Like, what? Like, would just throw people off. So that's my 2 cents to that.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Maven. I'm an actor, filmmaker, and a spoken word artist. I Just out of for clarity for everybody, a lot of people say they want to be podcasters. So the lady pointed out, like, how do you know it's for you? So I would like you to touch on that and give us, like, what was the moment for you that you realized, like, this is what I want to do? Because clearly you have quite the repertoire. You've done quite a few things in Oxford, Cambridge, if I heard that correctly. So if you can give us, like, this is what I did, and this was the moment for me where I realized what I want to do. Because I see a lot of people just, I want to do a podcast. Why? And they're like, because it's fun. So, I would like your thoughts on that.
So for me, it all kind of like happened accidentally, I would say. So during COVID, I was living with a roommate who is a big content creator, and he had all the equipment. And I started my content journey as being in his vlogs randomly. And I started being like, okay, that's the whole thing. And he built a huge business around it. And he's the one who kept pushing me, saying, you are very good at getting people to open up. Have you ever considered doing a podcast? And at the time, as I told you, I was already thinking there's so many cool women around me. They have such cool stories. I started writing blogs at the time, horrible at writing. And I was like, okay, this is not for me. Blogs is not for me. And then when he put that idea in my head that, okay, maybe conversation is the way forward for me, I thought, okay. And I remember telling my dad, and he was like, well, in school, every single teacher every year told us that you're a very bright student, but too talkative. So that has been my day one, that I'm someone who loves to talk and I engage people in conversation. And that's how, when the idea of the podcast came through, I was like, okay, let me try it. And the first time I did it, I was like, okay, this is it. That's the one for me. Honestly, first episode.
Hey, amazing. But so that means it seems you have tried different things. You were a blog writer. What else have you tried before you hit this one?
Just the blog.
Just blogs? Okay.
I think it's still out there if anyone wants to read it. It was horrible, but it's there.
All right. Thank you very much.
Hello again. So I'm interested in your thoughts of, is podcasting just a phase, and where do you see it in 5 years' time? And I'm not asking for stats or anything like that. It's your opinion. Thank you.
I think it's on the rise for sure for now. I think we were talking with Marwan the other day where we have more than 50 studios now in Dubai. And Dubai is tiny. So that means that there is a demand for it. Everyone wants to start a podcast. Everyone I meet either has started one, wants to start one, or is doing one. So it feels like everyone is getting on board. And I don't know if it's a phase, as you said, because when you think about it, now we're moving away from short form again, going back to long form. For example, I was at a meeting with Meta and they're telling us how people really want long form now, which is why Instagram Reels are about to get longer. So they already went from 30 seconds to 1 minute to 90 seconds, and now they want to make it longer. And TikTok also has up to 10 minutes now that you can upload. So they're all really increasing the numbers because they've realized that people don't necessarily just want the 30-second clips. People are now getting more engaged because people want conversation. And the difference between a podcast and any other type of production online is that podcast gives the impression of being raw and unedited and unscripted, even if that's not always the case. But once you see that podcast mic, you think, oh, okay, that's a raw, uncut version of the conversation. And that's why that's on the rise right now. If it will crash, I can't tell you, but I don't think it will be in the next 5 years, because right now, so at the start, a lot of sponsors who would come to me wanted to do just like a normal content. They didn't want the podcast. Nobody understood how the podcast works. And nobody understood how sponsorship of the podcast works. They were all like, oh, but can you just do a reel? Can you just do a story? Do a YouTube integration? But now everyone is coming specifically for, is everything okay? Oh. And so now they are coming specifically for the podcast. And now a lot of companies and brands have realized that they can start their own podcast and bring in a host that will bring them numbers. And now it's become also a bit of an ego thing where leadership wants to be on a podcast. They want to be interviewed. They want to share their stories. So I think for now, it will keep rising for at least a few years. And then who knows, maybe something else will come. Maybe it will be a podcast in the metaverse. But for now, I think it's here to stay.
Just a quick comment. Thank you so much. By the way, this is super valuable. And my question is, are you not getting overwhelmed with the trends? Are you sort of considering, like, how is this industry evolving? Are you constantly sort of following, okay, I'm doing long form now. Should I focus more on reels? Or is this mainly defined by the inquiries that you're getting as a business now, which you actually grew into, right? As a project, as a podcast project, as something that was your passion and that grew into business. This is a continuation of the question and the comment. And the last thing is, I think there's a lot here about how do you define your identity in the podcast. I think the lady there, the question was actually not about the strategy, but so you probably tried at the beginning, recorded a few episodes that were audio, but then how did you come to the feeling that this is my brand identity, this is my podcast identity, this is actually my story? Was it at the very beginning, or did you go through a journey of understanding that, and you now sort of you feel absolutely confident about what you're doing and what you're telling, what guests you're, like, do you have a vision, like you've got, like, you know, like when you're in the flow of what's happening with your project and with your business, do you feel it? And did you, obviously that was a journey of growth, of a personal understanding and reflection probably on what you have to say the best. So I think that is a question and a comment as well. So you can give your feedback. The question is the trends. Are you getting overwhelmed? And am I right to think that you went through a journey of understanding your brand or your podcast identity, your story identity?
Whoever said that, great joke. and getting overwhelmed, no. And I think I put it in that perspective, right? Any business you're doing, you need to know what's happening in your industry. Whether you're running a hardware store or you have a grocery shop, you need to know what's happening in the industry. Similarly, if you're running a podcast, you need to know what's happening in the industry. And I don't think there's any reason to get overwhelmed. It's just that we try to think that, oh, I've hit on the winning formula, let me just keep repeating and repeat. That's not how it works. Things change, people change, and like platforms change. We have Threads now that came up, and a lot of people are telling me, oh, you need to get on Threads. I cannot handle one more platform. I'm not going to get involved. So it's also a little bit about where do you see yourself fitting in well and what is working. If nothing is working yet, then yes, keep trying until something works. But if you find that, okay, this platform is working best for me, I enjoy this process, let me keep doing more of that. So I would say remove that feeling of like, this is overwhelming, because you make it overwhelming if you want to, but it's just about being aware and educated about what you're trying to do. Your other question, which was about my brand identity, as I said earlier, for me from day one, it hasn't changed. My description, my logo, my title, nothing has changed from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. I don't even remember how to change these. They're just there. And I've never felt the need to change because the identity of the podcast has stayed the same. I had a very clear vision of what I wanted to achieve and who do I want to speak to from day one. And that hasn't changed. Of course, now I feel validated at the end of the day. I do feel like, okay, people are getting on board of the mission. People see value in what I'm doing. People want to get involved and invested in it. Yes, that's a great feeling. But for me, my mission hasn't changed.
Thank you.
Okay, you know what? All right. I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of you who shared your comments, your questions. You are giving us more insight for me as a curator and organizer to know what hits your main points of interest so that this is all because we want to try and give you value. So if you have any suggestions in terms of what future topics you want us to cover or anything like this, please let me know. Yeah. So I do appreciate all of you sharing your comments, your questions, because it's giving me a lot of feedback as well. So thank you for that. And I just want to also ask everybody, please, to put your hands together and give a big thank you to Sheen for tonight.